while people are moving into the room, I think it's time to continue. What we are doing now is to have the feedback from the breakout groups, and just to remind you what we are doing with the results. So first of all, the results are important for the stakeholders if they would do some interventions during the plenary sessions over the week. This is one important topic, and the other is we have to produce a kind of report of the stakeholder days, and we need your bullet points and your results for this report. This report goes to the Secretariat and also to MAP and Bureau as the conclusions of this stakeholder day. Okay, so actually I have not your name in my mind.
I can say it myself.
Okay, you can say it yourself. It's the feedback from the group on
Scenarios and models.
Scenarios and models, please.
Okay, my name is Sylvia Carlson-Finkhuizen. It's anyway impossible to pronounce for non-Dutch. So we had a nice four groups total that were discussing the questions that we presented to the groups. And the nice thing was that we had a diversity of people in the groups. We did have scientists who are interested to use scenarios and who use it for their biodiversity research. But we also had policymakers from governments, from regional, working more at regional, national level, and also from intergovernmental organizations, and from NGOs. So that was a nice diversity. And examples of how people in our groups had already used scenarios in their work was, for example, using climate models for disaster work, or visioning exercises with local governments to support their biodiversity planning efforts. So the first question we raised was to identify policy and management options that could be tested and compared with the IPBES work on scenarios and models. And some of the input that we received, I mean, this is a rough first effort to summarize, is one mentioned the impact of voluntary initiatives, for example, on the Aichi targets. Another comment was that it's to just look at individual policy options is not enough. You have to address combinations of them, and particularly also the trade-offs between policy options. Education and awareness raising as a policy option was highlighted. Also capacity building, both formal and informal, and in that context, working with educators. Another issue that was discussed a lot was cross-scale approaches that are needed. And for example, the challenges that is only the national level that relate to the intergovernmental targets, and how to really get that to be implemented at local levels is a huge challenge. So this cross-scale aspect and other type of cross-sector policy making was another issue highlighted. How do you get those policy options in there, integrated policy making across different sectors, different economic sectors, and that when you do that, you need to include not only people from the sectors, but also scientists and boundary organizations who can enable that to happen. We also then discussed as a second point, what are the output options you would like to have from those scenarios? So what are the things that you mature that you want to see as the end point, or what you call it, the output of the scenarios? And there one point raised was cultural values, how people value the biodiversity at different levels, the impact of different educational strategies on how people value biodiversity, urbanization and how it will look like, and energy-related measures relevant, for example, linked to deforestation. And that was very brief, and I'll provide a longer written report and it was really valuable for the work in our expert group. So thank you very much all who contributed.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, and we appreciate that you send the longer version to Laurence and myself so that we can put it into the report. I invite Katja for reporting from the working breakout group on values.
Would you like to?
Should I?
No. Ah, you want to do that?
Okay.
Wenn du mir dann danach erzählen
Right. So, yes, reporting back from the values breakout group. So what we looked upon is actually at the TSU activities that have been in place the last couple of months, which are quite manifold and quite a lot of activities. And so we reviewed a bit what are the challenges actually which came out of these kind of discussions. So there were values workshops for the regional assessments. There will be one for the global assessment in April in Budapest this year. And there were quite a lot of internal meetings with different subsidiary bodies of IPBES to discuss how to actually integrate the values guide into these different kind of assessments, which is not that straightforward, as the guide proposes a 6-step approach on how to actually integrate different values, perspectives, preferences into these assessments, and also gives a quite broad overview of methods suitable for that kind of integration or for assessing values in a more general place. So the challenge is actually reported by the TSU on values are first of all the integration across all the chapters of these different assessments. As you know, for the regional assessments, there's the chapter 2 on nature's benefits to peoples, which is even more or less the most straightforward chapter of the assessment to integrate values into. But of course, values are also very useful and essential for all the other chapters in those regional assessments. But it's not that straightforward actually to include them into these different other chapters. Another challenge reported by the TSU is actually the different worldviews which are underlying these different preferences and values that one can derive from different discussions. So really thinking about who's actually reporting on what kind of values, what is the underlying worldview, what is the perspective, what kind of social cultural context is behind these kind of values reported. As a third point that was reported is the value-laden character of terms. So as we all know, IPBES has the term ecosystem services in its name already. And the idea or the question here is whether this is not already implicitly meaning something regarding to a certain worldview that we have. And we talked a bit about the conceptual framework that is actually trying to open up to different worldviews and open up the discussion on values towards these different terminologies that exist in different knowledge systems and so on. And what is, of course, another challenge is to actually leave the arena of IPBES and the academic arena or sphere of IPBES and to go a bit more into other knowledge dimensions, other actor arenas and so on. So really broaden and use the multiple values concept proposed by IPBES to other audiences. And last but not least, also to bridge the values with, for instance, the scenarios and models assessment that we have heard of before. Right, that was one point. And discussion was really rich and going quite beyond the discussion on the IPBES guide and the proposed 6-step approach. So what we talked also about is actually how to actually apply values in practice and planning and decision making, which is not that straightforward. So people report that they have difficulties or see challenges to actually apply the guide proposed by IPBES to their specific context and in a practical point of view. We also talked about the paper that was released just prior to IPBES 5, which is an open access paper on the guide. So if you want to really have a very brief and very concise summary of what is in the values guide, you could read that paper, which was launched in COSOST. And we talked a bit about what I mentioned before, the term of ecosystem services, and as this implies certain kinds of methodological and also conceptual challenges, IPBES decided to shift from the ecosystem services approach or from the terminology to nature's contributions to people, in short, NCPs. So if you are faced with that acronym, that is a new one that is now widely and consistently, hopefully, used by all IPBES assessments. And last but not least, there was quite a remark on whether not to learn from other processes, for instance, the IPCC, for instance, exploring their alternative pathways, another approach that they use to see what kind of different alternatives exist, also with regards to values, and to really liaise with those different other processes, which could be quite of an added value to IPBES values discussions. And and maybe last but not least, we talked about the scoping document on the possible values assessment. So as you all know, there are 3 assessments to be decided on whether to start them or not, which have been reported about this morning. So, and one of it is the values assessment. And so let's see whether the plenary is really deciding on starting this assessment or not. And we actually think that it would be great to do so, but there's pros and cons to do so. And we will be awaiting eagerly what the plenary says. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I forgot to mention, is there any questions for understanding, any feedback, any additions? No. Okay, so we change. Carsten, you are the next.
Take your
No,
microphone.
you want to take mic? Okay.
That's easier. Okay, thank you very much. I'm reporting back from the group that was discussing the proposal for the review of the effectiveness of IPBES, document 511. We were about 20 people in the room, and we were very glad that we had representatives from the MAP, from the bureau, from the secretariat, but also from some member states, which was quite helpful. And just very briefly saying, it's okay, you can keep it. Okay, so very briefly, we had quite detailed discussions because it's a technical document, but has many elements, as Thomas explained this morning. So we talked briefly about the evaluation criteria, the organization of the review process, and the draft questionnaire, which leads us to the second slide, please. And the first one was also some general comments that were drawn from the group. So one issue that we raised is a little bit of a worries about the timeline, because right now it is as planned. The external review is supposed to be finished in 2019 in IPBES 5 and presented at IPBES 7. And at the same time, there will already be the decision of the new work program. And we strongly feel that the review document should be ready well in advance in order to really have an influence on deciding on which elements should be in the work program. This also includes reflecting on the budget and other issues that should be done. Another important general issue is that it should be clear that this questionnaire which is proposed should be a central element, but that the external review really has the substantial resources to go for other means, to use the existing literature which is already existing on IPBES, to use interviews, to use focus groups and other elements in order to be relevant. Next slide, please. Then the third issue was the issue of the evaluation criteria. You might remember, if you have been engaged in this discussion and review a little bit, that the issue of what does effectiveness of the platform actually means is quite a substantial challenge to define effectiveness in the context of IPBES, because it has such a vast area of functions. So it should be important that this is more reflected of what effectiveness means, or either now by further defining it, or by leaving it to the external panel to somehow substantiate it with their own expertise they have in the context of IPBES. Also, in the evaluation criteria, we had the feeling that the issue of relevance is not that well tackled yet. Relevance relates to policy relevance and to the issue of impact as far as it can be measured. It's somehow in the questionnaire in some questions, but it's not explicitly in the criteria, although it's in the general description of the criteria. And then one thing we also felt, which is not so explicit in the criteria and then also in the questionnaire, is the issue to really look into the processes that IPBES is conducting with all its assessments and the interlinkages between these processes, that they should be reflected very much as well, because this is also an issue of impact of having processes where you can allow mutual learning and similar things. Next slide, please. The second major topic was the organization of the review. As you might remember from Thomas' talk this morning, there are several options that the Secretariat, the Bureau, proposed. The composition of the review panel, which is pretty open now with the 10 persons, was not commented by the group, so we feel fine with that. But the selection of the review panel, the way it should be done in order to really ensure independence, it should be done by a committee that is called for by the plenary here in the coming week. It should not be with the MAP and the Bureau to ensure independence, and also to ensure independence, the administration of the external review should be with a external organization, which also could be nominated, rather than with the Secretariat. So it's really important that the stakeholders stress that this issue of being as independent as possible for the external review part and being as transparent as possible would be important. And this brings us back to the last slide, please, which are some discussions or some comments on the questionnaire, where nonetheless we feel there would be a lot of things to be said. Simone from the Secretariat explicitly said that, of course, this is a starting point for the questionnaire, but from a design point of view, from an analytical point of view, it's important that there must be a strategy also in terms of how this is going to be analyzed, the data analysis. Normally, for such a huge questionnaire, you would do a sort of piloting, which would be important. Yes and no questions should be avoided. That should be used with somehow scaling issues. There must be a balance between quantitative and qualitative questions. The challenge that the question is really huge, the questionnaire, and once it's going out to different groups, it should be somehow targeted towards them. First of all, the questionnaire will go out internally, and there the document currently says it should only go to co-chairs and coordinating lead authors. We strongly feel it should go to all who have been engaged, so also lead authors, task force participants, similar, in order also to include and involve as many people as possible, to give them the opportunity to have a say. And then, of course, later on, when it goes in the external review, it goes to everyone, every stakeholder. It must be translated and presented in a form that is actually accessible, that the language is not too technical, and that also people can choose which part of IPBES and the huge parts that are in this questionnaire they actually feel they can answer, because answering everything will be really, really hard for most of the persons. So these are the main things we now want to summarize in a sort of draft statement then for the plenary, if the stakeholder group decides to do that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Carsten. So we come to the final report. It's from Joji. Joji, please, on the ILKL breakout group. Joji. Is it okay, or is it?
That's fine.
Should I?
That's fine.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Gunther. Well, there was very strong interest and participation in the working group, which is great. And we had with us the co-chair of the ILK task force, also the co-chair of our global assessment, and also the secretariat. It was actually great to have them present in the workshop, because our task was to reflect on the approaches paper. And there were a number of questions that came up, and it was great to have this discussion. The participants were quite diverse, again, which is great. We had the World Anthropology Union, UNU Centers of Excellence, ICLE, local governments. We had a number of governments there, Netherlands, Sweden, India, I think. We had the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge, academic networks, as well as citizen science. So I think it was very interesting that many of the constituencies who would be included in ILK were in the room, because it was stressed that we should have a wide and inclusive definition of ILK. It is everywhere. It is relevant to all the members of IPBES, and we should really make sure that it is broad enough to include groups that might be invisible. So that was excellent, that discussion. And following from there, we discussed the notion of the participatory mechanism. Because of course, potentially, all of these groups would be strategic partners in the work of IPBES. And the idea of the strategic partners is that there would be an inclusive process from the start to finish, from the conception phase to evidence generation to peer reviewing, but also giving back to the constituencies and those who have been participating. So therefore, everyone should mobilize our own networks beyond the capacities of the Secretariat to be able to organize regional workshops, which is within their work program. So we discussed carrying out dialogues with our own constituencies, possibly including with local constituencies, that these partners can also help in communications, translation into languages, setting up pilot projects, etc. So basically we saw that each of these constituencies would need some customized approaches. And in fact, there are differentiated institutional capacities, so we also need to understand that and attend to this in the setting up of the work. There was some discussion about the global assessment, which was very informative. That in fact there's this question-based approach which is addressing problems. For example, what are the contributions of indigenous and local knowledge to biodiversity and ecosystem services, the drivers and pressures undermining that, and also the impact of response measures. We also looked at the time scale that would be covered. It would look at transformation that has taken place in the past, current projects that are coming on board, the 20 to 30-year dimension, but also future scenarios. So I think we are given a much better understanding of how the global assessment would proceed. There were a number of interesting issues that already started to come out. For example, cultural ecosystem services and also the contributions of people to nature and the co-production with, between nature and people. There was a discussion on rotational agriculture and shifting cultivation and how that might be studied and looked at by governments actually. And also another thread was urbanization. Many changes happening in urbanization. Right? Then there were some methodological issues that were brought up. For example, synergies between indigenous and local knowledge and sciences, epistemologies of transmission of knowledge, as well as how universities can bring this into the formal system. Peer-to-peer exchanges as a high-impact approach, and then also data sharing protocols. If we bring out a lot of knowledge, how can we ensure that this is the use of it is protected and is according to certain standards. And that also brought us to a discussion of some resources that could be used. For example, the CBD has guidelines on prior informed consent, free prior informed consent, or participation and approval that got approved at its last COP. There was some discussion about mapping, a range of mapping methodologies of existing networks, but also actual mapping, geographic mapping, including cultural mapping. And then the UNFCCC also said that they have newly established a local communities and indigenous peoples platform under that convention. They'll have a meeting in May, and any of the information from that platform could also be shared with IPBES. Well, those are the general areas we covered in the workshop. We do have quite a detailed notes of what happened, which we will share with the Secretariat. But I'd ask our chair if there was anything missed to add to the report.
Thank you very much, Georgie. Chair, you want to add something?
Thank you. Thank you, Georgie, for a very good report. It was a wonderful group, very diverse, with very concrete ideas in terms of approach, nailing down the aspects of the proposed approach in terms of implementation after it's approved, hopefully. Georgie covered almost everything. I mean, not almost, every aspect that we discussed within the group. One important component that we also discussed was the importance of the communication back to the indigenous peoples and communities after assessments are done. So this is reflected in the approach document. However, we emphasize that it's something that needs considerable attention to pay to. Thank you very much, the entire group. I think that's it. Georgie covered everything that we discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamar. There was another hand, please. Yes, take a mic.
Thank you. I am a little worried about the ethical issues when we talk about indigenous knowledge. So I want to invite you to have a very clear background, a very clear setting for this communication with indigenous groups, because some of this knowledge, they don't want to share this, or they do not have confidence to share all of this. So we have to pay attention to these issues. Science governments are obligated to respect them, all these peoples. So I think IPBES have to have a very clear agreements with these groups. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments, remarks, outstanding issues to the results of the breakout groups? Yes, please.
The last point is an important point. There is a document that was produced by the ILK task force on operating principles for working with indigenous and local knowledge. And perhaps I think it's a matter of making that document more widely available, and so it can receive input as well.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for this comment. Any other comment? Question? Everybody fine, please?
Just a remark also on the report of group number 2. I think it was not specific, but it became clear that the complexity that arises from in structural concerns is so high and unprecedented also in other sciences that are left and right of us, that it is necessary to define research topics for partners that are not kernel IPBES people, but we have to reach out into professions that we need to solve our problems. And this reach out into the broader, for me it would be computer science community, for others it's regional planners, urban planners. They have the experience, but they also would benefit from joint discussion. And there are so many things that are top scientific challenges that it is a really fantastic program to come up with it.
All right, thank you very much for this comment. Any other comments, questions? That's not the case. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the reporting back of the breakout groups. We now come to our final session. It's about the organization of the stakeholders' joint work throughout the week. There was people collecting ideas for the opening statement, elements for the opening statement. We received some bullet points. I just want to mention one or two. More visibility on marine biodiversity is needed. Indicators are needed at the national level. A transparent, interdisciplinary perspective is needed. Successful experiences, success stories, and so on and so on. So we will take that on board and we put that together in an opening statement. We will discuss that later on after this session in the stakeholder network session that will start later on. So our work is organized throughout the week. The stakeholder work is organized throughout the week, like we are meeting in the morning at 9 o'clock at the stakeholder room. Some of you have already been there. It's a 1.99 over there. We meet at 9 and we will discuss the agenda item of the day and also put together some interventions if needed. I'd like to announce the meeting of the Open-Ended Stakeholder Network. I think we are right in time, so I suggest to meet at 5:30 in the room, stakeholder room 195, of the people who would like to be engaged in the Open-Ended Stakeholder Network to learn a bit more how the stakeholder network is organized, what kind of topics we need to discuss. We have some internal stuff on terms of references, on the web page issue and the collaboration with the Secretariat, and of course on the opening statement. And there's my hand over to Caroline to announce your presentation or your posters. It's not yours personally, I know, but okay. Yeah, you.
Oh, do you want to hold it up? Is this one on? Yes. So this is just from Robert Sproul, the comms lead at the Secretariat. There are heaps of posters like this one. That there are extras to bring back to your own institutions to put up on walls if you're allowed. And they're just right behind, I think it's just right about there. Right about in the back, just as you're walking into the plenary hall. So please do take some home. There's the lovely jellyfish one for those of us that are marine and very much like this photo, but they're basically, I think there are 3 or 4 different designs. So please do take one home. And speaking of photos, is it photo time now?
Okay, before we go to the picture, there was the idea to have a picture of the group later on. I would like to close the Stakeholder Day and thank all the participants, all of you, for your work, for your interventions, for your cooperation, for being very active in the breakout groups. I'd like to thank all the participants, the speakers, the facilitators in particular, and the rapporteurs, our technicians up there for the webcast, and IISD for reporting. And in particular, I would like to thank Laurence for her excellent work together with me. And also Sarah. Sarah, I have a small present for you. That is green tea from a tiger reserve. So I hope this is the right present to you. Thank you very much, Sarah. All right, so please come here in the middle of this place here, and we invite our colleague from IISD to have a picture of the group. Please, come down. Come down, come down, come down. You need to be in front.
Like some on the side?
Yeah, we can. The big guys can stand here, so to say.
Vor dem World Conference Center.
Okay,
komm, wir stellen uns bei.
Yeah. I go up here because
behind here.
I'm very small.
I need one of these.
No, you can take it.
Ich hatte auch andere gefragt, nice, I want to take one. Und der hat gesagt, nimm's eins mit, wir haben genug.
All right. Yeah. You can wave the flag.
We can wave the flag.
Where do you want us? Should we be standing somewhere in the front?
It's going to be a 360-degree photo. Is it?
Okay. Okay, Laurence, let's stay.
Yes, in front of the IPBES thing?
Ah, okay.
No.
Oh, you can see something.
Depends on where they take the pictures. Who's the photographer?
Yeah. I have a mic behind me. My plan.
You can also stay.
It's good enough.
So you do it, yeah.
My boss is not on it, okay? Das wäre sinnvoll.
Delegates.
Jetzt zwei. Ich habe ein paar Global Change Ecologists.
Ich muss dir gleich die Liste geben, nicht, dass ich das vergesse.
Du kannst auch noch ein bisschen hier reinkommen, ne?
Genau.
Die Trinity. Ist doch super. Finde ich gut.
Do you want to come here?
Yes.
All right. It's all the young people here.
All the good ladies.
No, Günther is already grey-haired. Hello.
Were you here all day?
No, I couldn't. I had another meeting and they were late.
One more.
Try a few minutes. No, that was the first.
You can see.
Ooh, that's an important question. If you can stand on the table or not.
Well, if you take your shoes off, come on.
It's not just...
Go upstairs.
Yeah, I take all the responsibility if the table falls down or I fall off the table.
on the table. Oh yeah, you can on the
Schön, wenn sie nicht so viel Geld in so Sachen investieren würden, hätte vielleicht doch ein bisschen mehr Geld für wichtige Sachen.
Naja,
Das ist so.
Well, he can go on the balcony. Yeah. Come on, Sarah, come on.
I heard about this strange thing called
Aussicht. Ich muss nicht so unbedingt da drauf sein. Ich finde mich immer in Wirklichkeit schöner als auf den Bildern.
Ich glaube, das geht mir auch. Das geht für 80% der Menschen.
Nicht fotografieren. Im Gegensatz zu Katja. Ich habe deinen schönen Rücken fotografiert.
Meinen schönen Rücken? Ja, der ist toll, ne?
Mit Carsten kommuniziert.
Das ist schön. Ist mir auch gleich aufgefallen, dass es eine großartige Rollenverteilung war, jetzt wo ich ja da raus bin aus dem.
Sehr gut, ihn zu instrumentalisieren. Was
ich hatte das ja gar nicht, also so, er hat es ja ganz freiwillig angeboten. Ja, gewesen. So, und jetzt ist er quasi der Ex-Chef und jetzt quasi, ne?
Kommt vielleicht nicht
Ich weiß nicht. Manchmal mehr, manchmal weniger. Aber ist schon gut.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Hey.
Don't fall over. Sarkozy. Does work.
All right. Should we wait?
So ein tolles Poster.
I'll come back tomorrow, but I have to leave at noon.
Don't you need to talk up at the front to get that photo?
What's your name? I'll give you a card now. So let's no. I'll find it. Yeah.